Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my ChinWag here on the Vobes Show. I am Richard Vobes. It's the 19th of July, 2022, on another lovely sunny day. I'm very much looking forward to this one because I'm told it's going to be rather warm, and I do like warm weather. So that's great. I'm not talking so much about the weather in today's show, although we will be looking at the comments and things very shortly. But first, the subject I want to talk about today is everything just too big, too huge, this sort of globalized world that we live in, where you've got everything is so huge that almost they can't manage it. Everything's been dumbed down or become bland. The service is no longer the service that it was. I understand that, you know, when you get big, you have the economy of scale, so things can be produced more cheaply, so you can have more of the stuff produced, especially new technologies, like when the first iPhones or mobile phones or smartphones, I suppose, came in, and they would have been incredibly expensive because to create smaller units on smaller runs would have been too prohibitive for the general public. And so if you can up the amount that are sold, then you can get they're going to be cheaper per item for everyone. The initial investment might be expensive, but if you can persuade everybody to buy them, you can bring the price down. And I get that. It doesn't seem to be the same with houses for some reason. Everybody wants to buy a house, and yet the house prices continually go up. How does that work? Oh yeah, because we've only got a limited amount of land. Take the NHS then, for example. My partner, my new lovely girlfriend, Julia, has had a kidney infection. Now, this is a common problem. A lot of people get kidney infections. It's not an unusual thing. It happens to most people, but particularly I understand that it's women are more likely to get it because of the fact that the urinary tract is lower. I don't ask me about the biology. I'm a man. What do I know? And what do I know about most things? But anyway, I understand that women are more likely to have kidney infections and urinary problems, particularly young women, for a number of reasons, which we needn't go into. But it's not an unusual thing, is what I'm trying to get to deal with. And so Julia was feeling very rough, and she needed at some point, because she could barely walk and she had this stabbing pain in her back and round her kidney area, some help. And her mum had said, look, sounds like the kidney infection, probably need to talk to your doctor. Of course, this was on a Sunday. Doctors are shut. The out-of-hours doctor service we have in this country is the 111 service. You dial 111 on your telephone, and then you're diagnosed, or is it diagnosis? Not really. It's a tick box exercise in which at some point you get a report made, and there's a decision whether a doctor is going to call you, or indeed an ambulance might be sent, or you're just given some advice, sweat it out and see what it's like in the morning. I don't know. I don't think they can give that advice. I think at some point they have to put it through to a doctor or a paramedic's got to see you. Not 100% sure. It's very rare that I use that service. The last time I had to use that service was about 5 or 6 years ago when my son had a brain hemorrhage and nearly died. And even then, when the paramedics came along, they were arguing whether it was a fever or whether it was something else. And one of the paramedics had said, well, I would put him to bed and see how he was in the morning. And if we'd taken that advice, my son Billy would have been dead. Fortunately, another one came along and said, no, I don't think it's that. We should get him to the hospital. And it was then that it was established that he had a bleed on his brain, and he was rushed to intensive care in Haywards Heath. And he still nearly died, but fortunately he didn't. And I was very lucky, and the family had a huge shock. And we have a great respect, I should add, for the NHS. However, this early part of the system where you're not very well, doctors are overwhelmed, it seems, with patients because there's so many people in this country. So we rang the 111 service. I also rang the hospital as well, because we weren't sure. What do you do on a Sunday night? Your partner is in pain. You're not quite sure what it is. It could be a kidney infection, but it could be something more serious. You just don't know. So I rang both, but I rang the hospital first to say, well, it's a very hot evening. Do we want to go into A&E? What's the situation at A&E? Will they accept somebody with these symptoms? And the hospital told us, they said, well, it's incredibly busy, as you can imagine. A lot of people had potentially been out at the weekend drinking, got sunstroke, and was ending up in A&E for a whole host of reasons. My son, the same one that had the brain hemorrhage, by a stroke of complete irony, used to work at A&E. And he told me how many people would come in and just say, I've got a headache, and feel that they were entitled to see a doctor when they've had a headache, that various symptoms were not an accident or an emergency, and that people were unable to work out whether what they had was either an accident or an emergency, and that actually they would just hold on to that pain until the morning and go and see a doctor. Now, we know going and seeing a doctor is a very tricky thing. So we heard that that was the situation. We also heard that if you go to A&E, because of these COVID cases again, here we are in the hottest day when that's killing the virus left, right and centre. We all know that sunshine is one of the best things. Vitamin D is a great thing for getting rid of the virus. Everybody's wearing masks. So you could imagine if you're in severe pain and you're sitting there in A&E on a very hot, sweltering day, having to wear a face nappy that's not really protecting you from anything other than you're now just breathing your concentrated CO2 back in. The poisonous air that you're trying to expel, you're actually breathing back in. But let's leave that for another day. And you'd be sitting there. Now, the hospital was unsure, because this wasn't the A&E department. They said, we're not quite sure whether partners are allowed in. So knowing that you'd be in there for 4 hours, and knowing that Julia would be in pain, would have to be sitting on these plastic seats waiting to be seen for a long time in a mask, in a most uncomfortable thing, with a whole bunch of other sweaty people passing goodness knows what, we chose to ring 111, the out-of-hours doctor, because we didn't really think that this was an absolute emergency, even though poor Julia was in pain. And we rang. We got through to the checkbox system, where there's somebody who is trained to a degree, but clearly not a nurse or a doctor, is finding out what's wrong with the patient by going through a series of questions, which, when you listen to some of the absurd questions, given the information that you've given to them, they clearly don't know what to do with the information. So if you give them extra information when they're asking you effectively a yes or no, is the pain here, or is there swelling there, or are you still breathing? Is the patient still breathing? And they're talking, and you go, yes, they are. So you know clearly these people are not really trained in any form other than to answer the questions and find the next bit. So that takes a while. Then you've got to wait. We waited about an hour, and then a phone call came from a doctor, and the doctor asked a whole load of series of questions based on that initial diagnosis, which was slightly worrying, because for some reason they'd got it into their head that possibly Julia was either having a heart attack, her legs were supposedly going blue and had bloated, and that her chest was inflamed in some way, and was saying, no, that's not where the pain was. I don't know where you got that idea from, because we've never said that. Anyway, so we went through this doctor, and the doctor sort of said, yes, we think it's probably a kidney infection, or it's something to do with the urinary tract infection. What you probably need is some antibiotics. Great, we will contact your GP and we will send it through. So far we thought, okay, that's a reasonable process. The first bit, it's a shame you can't just speak to a doctor who can instantly ask you the right questions, but I understand that with everything, you've got to have a filtered system. So that was fine. However, they then said, the thing is, we will send this through to your doctor, but the best advice is that you turn and present yourself at your GP in the morning at 8:30 when they open, which we did, and Julia went in. Of course, the doctor's surgery was saying, "Oh, have you got a mask?" To me, I don't wear a mask. And I said, "No, I haven't got a mask. Why would I have a mask?" They said, "Well, you can't come in then." "Oh, have you got a mask that I can put on so I can accompany my partner to wherever she needs to go?" No, there was no mask, none offered. I thought, well, that's strange. Only a few months ago, we were sort of literally given them with every, buy a couple of potatoes, get a free mask. But no, they wouldn't. But they wouldn't let me in. So Julia had to go and give a urine sample, which was then to be processed by one of the nurses and then handed to another doctor, who was then going to ring and find out. And of course, that didn't happen. So we were in there at 8:30 in the morning. Julia had been in pain the previous night. She'd been in pain all day. And finally, at about 4:45 in the afternoon, did we get a phone call to say, "Oh, hello, what is the problem?" None of the original doctor's diagnosis from the out-of-hours doctor, the 111 service, seemed to have been passed on whatsoever, other than that, yes, they have mentioned that you might come in. That's it. That was the sum total. So none of the advice or the early diagnosis had been taken into account. So Julia had to go through the whole process yet again. And then finally they said, right, okay, we will send a prescription to the pharmacist, which then seemed to take forever. And eventually we managed to get it. And so we were lucky. And so now Julia is on that some, whatever it is, 30 odd hours later. And the whole process could have been much quicker. Now, I'm not so much complaining about that incident per se. I'm just using that as an example. But it just seemed to me that the overall system seems too big, that we've had to waste 2 doctors' time to diagnose a kidney infection and to get the patient straight onto some medication, which just seemed absurd. Now, when I was younger, and I've mentioned this in The Naked Englishman, my daily podcast that I produce, I remember that we used to have a family doctor. You would go to the doctor, or you'd be introduced to the doctor, and you would grow up with this doctor who would know the family, and you'd be able to go and see them and get on with things. And if there was a problem, they would instantly go, "Oh yes, the so-and-so family, yes, we know they're a bunch of so-and-sos, don't trust them one iota." Or the such-and-such family, yes, they're a very nice family, no problem with them. They seem to live this sort of lifestyle and they eat healthily, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, the doctor would know enough about you to understand a lot of things, and so you could speed things up a lot quicker. The other thing is, of course, they used to do rounds. They used to actually visit people and come round and go and have a bedside manner and go, "Now, Mrs. Jones, what seems to be the problem with you today?" That system worked, seemed to work very well. But now we have this amalgamation of doctors who work, it seems, sort of part-time hours. They make a lot of money, about £100,000 from what I understand that doctors make these days. And they only work part-time. They choose to only work several days a week. And the rest of the time they're doing whatever they are doing, possibly working in the private sector and not at the NHS, I don't know, to make just that little bit more money, because after all, £100,000 is not enough, is it? And it just seems that the whole system seems these days to be less efficient, less friendly, and the patient just feels more like a number rather than a valued member of society. Now, I don't know how the GP surgeries are funded, because presumably every patient, if you're on the NHS in a GP surgery, is worth something to the GP surgery. Every patient is worth an amount. So you are a client, even though you're not paying directly, that the government is paying, although we pay our taxes and our national insurance and all of that. So we are still the clients, but you're not treated as such, particularly when you go to a GP surgery and always, it seems, the officious secretary at the front is very much batting away. "Well, we can't possibly do that. No, you can't speak to a doctor. No, they're very busy. No, go away, leave us alone." You feel that you're actually being a pain, and yet you are the paying customer ultimately through your taxes for a service. And even on the phone, ringing through to the GP, they say, well, we have a zero tolerance. And in fact, so much so that we'll tell you, if we don't want to, that you'll go to another surgery, which doesn't sort of bode well. And you think, well, actually, if I want to state my case, not in a rude way, but an assertive way, because I am basically the client here, they'll just turn around and say, well, go and find another doctor, which does seem a little bit, can leave you as a patient a little bit in the lurch. So my question is everything just gone a bit big? I mean, it's the same with chain stores and the whole thing about what I would call excessive capitalism. I'm a capitalist. I believe that people should be able to go and work and earn money and earn a profit for them, their families. I believe that you should be able to earn enough money that you can retire comfortably if you wish to, or not, and that you can leave your money to your heirs. So I believe in handing down and giving your children a good start in life if you can. I believe in all of that. I don't believe that I believe that there's also a point where it becomes excessive. So you could start a chain store and perhaps in your town have 2 or 3 of these stores. It might be a hardware store. But where you start then taking over other towns and making a bigger profit, or you start to get rid of, like a number of these local, what do they call it, chain stores, like, I don't want to mention their names because I don't want to give them the advertising, the big supermarket brands that have the smaller ones that knock out some of the smaller little grocery shops and all of that, which of course has happened over the last 40, 50 years, in which you no longer see a butcher or a greengrocer in your high street anymore. You just have this one big corporate that is sitting there. And of course, the economy of scale means their prices are cheaper. And then we've got the whole processed food that's on a global scale. And in the end, is not terribly healthy because people are making the wrong choices because they can buy processed food that has a whole load of nasty stuff in it. And hence you see people overeating because they can buy food at such a cheap price and they're eating far too much. Has everything gone too big? And you could say, have people themselves, as a result of that, got too big? I believe we have. Farms is another thing. I was watching with my lovely Julia last night a 1960s farm on some cine footage, and the retired farmer was talking fairly recently about the farm and the old ways of doing things. The whole farm now is covered in houses these days. Look at the amount of new homes and everything now being done on a computer, so that architecture for houses just looks so bland and boring. They're all the same cookie cutter type of houses. It's just bland, like the service that you get now is bland, no longer bespoke. Has everything just got too big? And what was nice about small stuff when you used to go into a shop and the shopkeeper would know you, hello Mrs. Jones, what would you like today? That sort of thing. We've lost something? Is it just me, or am I just bemoaning? I know a lot of people will say, well, it's great that we can have everything so cheap, and we've cluttered our houses up with so much cheap stuff that you can have a fashion that's in fashion this week and buy it for a ridiculously low price from somewhere in China that's been come over all the way over to here, and then next week it's out of fashion, so you can go and buy something else. I remember buying my very first camera, which was a Zenith camera, a Russian camera, and it lasted for years. Whereas these days, you buy a camera this year, the latest thing, it's got a bigger sensor, it's this, that, and the other. And next year, that's no good, that's obsolete now, you should be buying this. Why? Everything, it seems to me, has got far too big and is of no use, that it's just becoming blander and blander. Be interested in your thoughts. Do make a note of them in the comments. Talking of comments, let's have a quick gander through the comments in recent ones. Does anyone know the answer? Is a question I posed. And Barry Stevens says, there are always wars going on around the world. The media and the government only choose to oppose the ones that will support their agenda the most. And I totally agree. That does seem to be the case. I mean, when the Russia and the Ukraine war started up, we were worried about what was going to happen to the Ukraine, but we suddenly no longer got worried about what was happening in other parts of the world where things were pretty dire to a number of people, that children were being murdered. But people were happy to virtue signal by putting the Ukraine flag as their what do you call it? Not the emoji, the you know what I mean, the thing that you have as your picture. I forget the word. Believe me, he says, I don't support Ukraine or Russia, but if I was forced to, I'd support Russia, he says. At least Putin is honest. Look at the history of the leader of Ukraine and what he did to his own people in 2010s. Slaughter thousands of his own people who didn't agree with him. Where are the ones who are ruling the global agenda? It's a very good point. He makes some other points. Andy Dalglish says, I love the heat and was fine in Bulgaria at 39 degrees, but the humidity here is another story. When the chalk of the downs was deposited, the world was a much hotter place. Surely human activity had an impact, but in the long term, the climate is cooler than it used to be. Technically, we're coming out of the Ice Age. We humans have only been around on the blink of an eye. Hang on, kids, it's going to be okay. Basically, I think he's saying calm down. This whole weather stuff is another stick to beat us with, is it not? Everyone's, one of the comments that you hear at the moment is how the weather maps have started to look fiercely grim. I mean, in the old days, it was, as so many of these people have pointed out, who question all of this fear-mongering, is we just used to say, there's the sun is coming out. Isn't it wonderful to have the sun? It's so lovely. In the winter, we'll be waiting for the sun to warm us up as more and more people die of cold. Fewer people die of heat than in the cold. So but again, the government and the mainstream media, the nanny state, are telling us what we should be fearful of and why we should be fearful, and that we're all going to die in a horrible and agonizing death. And yet, somehow we don't actually die in this horrible and agonizing death. Yes, there's a few freak events, but nothing really any more than normal. And they say, oh, well, it's all changed since records began. But wait a minute, when did those records begin? Our life has been on here for thousands of years, and the records weren't begun back then. Louise Lage, or Lage, I'm not quite how you pronounce your surname, Louise, says, not sure if you'll see this, but here goes. Sorry to hear that Julia isn't well, especially with the heat. I hope that she has a speedy recovery. It goes without saying that having unusually hot weather is very hard on the young, the elderly and the infirm. I think it's probably best not to underplay the dangers of extreme heat. I live in a country where air conditioning in homes and cars are very normal. So if things get bad, we scuttle indoors and stay cool. We also have homes with basements, recreation rooms, which on the whole are pretty cool, even in the heat of the July sun. But there are still many who ignore the temperatures because of their ignorance and egos and inevitably end up in ER, or as we would say, A&E. It's true that most UK homes do not have AC, which is air conditioning, or basements to cool off in. That can be a challenge for many people. If that's the case, heat stroke is deadly, and for those who are not used to the heat, they may not realise how overheated they are getting until it's too late. And yes, some people do need to be reminded of this for what it's worth. Yes, I think that's true that people do need to be reminded, and you can do it, it's going to be very warm, so stay indoors. I think part of the problem is that we've had the mainstream media, we've had the government telling us what to do all the time for so long that a lot of people, it would seem, have become so reliant on this parent figure that isn't our parents, that isn't our own ability to work out common sense, that we almost need to turn to the organisations, these corporate, these government, these mainstream media people to just tell, what should I do? What should I do? I need to Google, what should I do? It seems that people are just not able to work it out for themselves. So I don't blame the people for not being able to work it out for themselves. I just feel that we've been telling people how to live their lives for so long that a lot of people just can't work it out any longer. And so they've been nannified. I don't know if that's a word, but that's a word I'm going to use. Anthony Conti says here in Latin America, 80% of COVID deaths were people who were not vaccinated. The jab does not guarantee that you won't catch it, but that you're more likely to survive if you receive the vaccine. And I can't argue with or against that because I'm not in Latin America and I don't know the facts about that. So, I mean, there you go. It just seems like a strange vaccine if it doesn't actually stop you from getting something. I mean, it's like sun cream. You can put sun cream on. It doesn't guarantee that you won't get skin cancer, but it's a protective measure. It seems to me that the vaccine is more a protective measure for those that are in the age bracket who could benefit from it. But if you're somebody who, let's say, sits in that basement that Louise was talking about, or is inside with air conditioning, you wouldn't be putting sun cream all over you, would you? Why would you? And that's what I think about the vaccine, that if you're in the age bracket that you don't need it, and most children, if not such a huge number, 99.9% of children, for example, certainly don't need it, why would you risk them having a vaccine? That would be my argument there. Sisyphus says 41.66 degrees here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Brutal heat. 41, I would imagine that's quite hot. But last winter it got down to minus 21 degrees also. And that seems very cold as well. The weather here has not changed in my 57 years on this earth. Our cow fart counts are up a little this year. Sorry, Greta. Yes, I totally agree. I think if you live in an area in which the temperatures go from plus 41 degrees down to minus 21 degrees centigrade, then you're going to work out how to sort out your accommodation and your lifestyle according to those extremes. And if you don't like it, you perhaps would move to somewhere else. But mostly, I think most people will work out that actually it gets hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter and there are degrees of it, and so you make the appropriate action. Over here, of course, we're not so used to having hot summers, and it's a bit of a rare thing. But, of course, it being a rare thing to have a lovely heat wave, like we used to get hot summers, everybody's going, well, of course, it's proof that it's global warming. It's proof. And there was some woman on the news telling everybody that children in the future will never now know those milder summers that we only had last year and the year before and the year before that, because we've had 1 or 2 days here. And you just think, are you actually listening to what rubbish is coming out of your mouth? Are you hearing yourself? The children of tomorrow will never have it. More scaremongering. Just tell us what the facts are now. Don't tell us what your weird, mixed up brain is thinking is going to happen in the future. So there we go. And finally, Jam Jar Dan says, I'm sitting in the middle of the forest. It's currently 29.7 at 3:30 where I am. That's in the afternoon. Forests are my tip when it's hot. Definitely cooler under the canopy of trees. And when we were travelling about on one of those hot days that was supposed to be up in the late 30s, it was actually only 27. And down here on the coast, it's not really gone much beyond 28 degrees as far as my thermometer has said. So keep in the forest. I think that is under the trees is probably the best place. Apologies if your comments are going up late, and many of them, for reasons I'm not quite sure, have been put into the moderation bin, and then I have to go in and put them out. So they will go out. But so if you left a comment and it's not showing up immediately, fear not. It's just a question of when I can get around to looking at them. But I very much appreciate them, and thank you much for doing it. I do try to read them all. I don't necessarily get a chance to answer all of them, but I do appreciate it. Anyway, that's plenty from me today. Have a good time. Is everything getting too big? Are you somebody who just thinks, no, it's much better to have the economy of scale? I like bland. I'm into bland. I don't want bespoke. I don't want the more unusual and the sort of, we're told that diversity is king, and yet we're actually, when you look around, this world is less diverse than you can imagine. Everything seems the same, blander. You've got the same fast food restaurants all over the place, the same coffee houses, the same chain stores, the same style of architecture. This business about diversity just seems to be a red herring. I would like a more diverse country. In fact, before the Second World War, we were quite diverse. You could go around and see some beautiful cottages in the Cotswolds, or go up to the cities in Scotland and see Granite City and see different places everywhere you would go. But now it's becoming blander. And the worst thing is we're building on farmland and making the world even blander still. Is it getting too big? Is everything too big? Leave your comments below. Till next time, bye-bye.